Welcome everyone. So we are very happy, and I'll start recording now before I forget.
I already did,
Uh,
Giuseppe.
okay, great. Thank you, Anna.
No worries.
So welcome everyone. We are very happy to see you today because this is a special episode of our Equality, Diversity, and Inclusiveness podcast, The Elephant in the Room. The podcast has been on for a couple of years now, I think, and we did a few episodes already on different issues concerning EDI matters. So we had episodes on disability inclusion. We talked about mental health, gender mainstreaming. We already had also one episode on Pride last year, but for this Pride month, we thought of doing something different, and so we decided to launch and to organize a live episode. So we are very happy to have an audience. So thank you for joining, and we are very happy to have with us Konstantinos Eleftheriadis. I'm sure I pronounced your family name wrong. We tried it before,
No, it
but
was very good.
it is good. Okay, thank you. So Konstantinos contacted us to see if we could collaborate on EDI issues. And so considering that Konstantinos was a former researcher at the UI, and you'll tell us a little bit more about your research in a moment. And currently, Konstantinos is also an EDI consultant and a colleague. So we thought it was a great opportunity to invite you to as a guest in our podcast to talk a little bit about Pride Month and to reflect on the meaning of Pride and to connect Pride Month and the issues concerning LGBTQ plus rights with the broader context we are facing politically, also considering the backlash on EDI and the different ways um, the rights of underrepresented groups are challenged, and in most serious cases, also how authoritarian regimes are trying to eradicate minorities. We're going to discuss all this and also reflect a little bit about the role of universities and our role as EY members, but also as allies on how we can find ways to contrast these trends. So, but before starting, Konstantinos, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, and I'll stop talking and I'll let you introduce you and your work, and maybe also your story and your background with the institute.
Well, thanks so much, Giuseppe, for inviting me here, and thanks to all the EDI team of the EUI that have worked for this podcast and this live event. I'm very happy to return, even from distance, but it's fine. At my alma mater, where I graduated in 2014, I had a PhD in social and political sciences from the SPS department. With the then Professor Donatella Della Porta, who was supervising my thesis. And I'm also happy to see that the UI has put in place a diversity, equality, and inclusion, not only policy, but also an office, which means that actually things are advancing quite in the right way. And me, it also corresponds to what I have been doing so all these years, because since 2014, after navigating into the academic sector, I decided to put all my expertise and knowledge on the service of diversity and inclusion. And this is, as you told Giuseppe, I'm now a diversity, equality, and inclusion consultant. I have my own company called Prismata, and I'm particularly working with academic institutions because of my background, but not only. And I'm happy to discuss all the things that you mentioned about Pride Month, but not only, all the diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion policies that matter today.
That's great. Thank you, Konstantinos. So I'd like to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about EDI. So I'll start with that's kind of an interested question because we are colleagues in a way. So um, I was wondering, as an EDI consultant, considering all the backlash that we are seeing and we're facing when it comes to EDI, and for example in the United States, but also in other countries around the world, it seems EDI became almost a poisonous term. And so I was wondering, did you feel this in your work, and as you were approached to EDI and to do EDI changed?
Totally. First of all, let me remind you that I'm basically based in Paris, France. So, of course, I work with international organizations, but I'm also very much localized in the French context. And just a brief reminder about DI. When I was doing my PhD at the EUI, I was not even aware that DI existed even as a professional sector, right? So that's important to notice because many students today they are more aware of the DI. I receive lots of messages from master students already who want to enter the DI sector because it's a sector that works for the common good, and it's a very nice job, right? To be honest, so. Which means that things are quite recent as well. So everything happened quite fast, especially in France. The main entry point for the DI policies was the anti-discrimination framework, which is a European framework, right? That actually sets the grounds on which person cannot be discriminated, especially in the workplace. And so, for many companies, 10 or 15 years ago, this was an important issue because they just wanted to comply with the law. So, one of the things that like the DI policies were basically very much connected to the existing legal frameworks, and they wanted to adapt themselves to the current legislation. Slowly, and also thanks to like internal mobilization in the professional organizations, which means basically employees, students, or other people working inside, companies opened up a bit more in order to adopt even like policies that were going beyond the strict legal framework. So not only anti-discrimination policies, but basically what we call today inclusion, how we can be open to diversity and how we can accommodate this diversity and be more inclusive. And this goes beyond the legal framework because in reality, in Europe at least, the law does not tell us whom we should hire. The law tells us on what grounds we cannot say no to someone, right? So it's more restrictive than inclusive in the end of the day. So this is the history of DI policies in France, but I guess also in other European countries. And the problem started, I think, 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, with a turbulent political context that was not very helpful in that sense, to the extent that all the work that we have been doing all these years, which means to actually make DI less political to some extent and more professional, was to some extent destabilized by the politicization of the issue by the far-right governments from the US, of course, but not only. In Hungary, we see, in Italy probably, I guess. So the fact that basically, to make the story short, is that governments today say that diversity and inclusion is very political, and we are bringing in politics where we shouldn't bring politics, and that we are actually, to some extent, a bit woke as well. You might have heard this word. Maybe we have the time to come back a bit later on what woke means and what it represents, but it's a more or less accusation of actually what we are doing is not for the profit of people who work inside a professional organization, but it's rather because we bring a political agenda inside. And I have lots of arguments to say that this is false and this is just not true. It's pure accusation and lies.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying. Also, this, brief overview on how EDI developed. So as you were saying at the beginning, we had a legislative framework, and we still have legal frameworks and so laws that we need to comply with. And so that's brought EDI into the workplace, even if when it wasn't called EDI, maybe it was called equal opportunities or anti-discrimination legislation. But that was sort of a, let's say, negative framework in the sense that you should not discriminate, and so you should put in place certain minimal measures. And then we moved on to inclusion, saying, okay, we need to do more and be more proactive. And that's when the political argument came into play, and it's interesting how probably a combination of the two is important to maintain. So I don't know if in France you can see a trend towards continuing supporting EDI programs. And if I think about organizations, I don't know, even the UI, I don't know if you would have any advice, a piece of advice on how to continue do EDI work in this context, avoiding EDI becoming a political tool or weapon, let's say, politicized.
Well, I think this is the challenge that we DI professionals face, is how to encourage organizations to bring in more inclusion without at the same time claiming politics, right? So this is the main challenge that we face. So not to be very pessimistic, on the other hand, I would say that the DI policies still exist, especially in the European context, because, for example, the laws are still here. Companies should comply to anti-discrimination laws, but not only, to gender equality laws, to disability laws. So, I mean, there is a series of laws to which European states should still comply. And this makes organizations of the public and of the private sector still needing to train their human resources, their managers, or their employees in general on these issues. So this hasn't stopped really. What has stopped is basically, I would say, this positive dynamic of bringing more inclusion in the organization, which means that basically what I see is that organizations would say now, okay, we will do the minimum, which means whatever is required to do, because actually we have to do it, and because it's still very legal, so it's more objective to some extent. But when it comes to further initiatives that would face skepticism from the inside or from the outside, I see more hesitance, to be honest, especially the last 12 months. But we still need to wait a bit to see if this is more conjunctural or it will be systemic from now on. But and another thing I observe in some organizations is the wording. For example, recently I had a client who asked me if we could change the word diversity and inclusion and rather adapt it to more neutral wording, such as well-being, or these kind of words, which it can be a strategy to some extent, but it also says a lot on the politicization of the words today, and how the word diversity and inclusion have been utilized by governments, and not only, and also from religious actors and other conservative actors, in order to stop this dynamic, this positive dynamic that I was talking before.
That's also very interesting, your point about language, because if I think about also the development and the evolution of EDI, at the beginning, it was called, equal opportunities, anti-discrimination. Then, according to some, it's not a common opinion, but according to some, we went to inclusion because it was more appealing. Saying equal opportunities would immediately trigger some resistance reactions, and saying law or anti-discrimination would immediately start triggering certain types of thoughts. But it seems that even inclusion now, it's not enough.
Exactly.
It's not neutral enough. So that's very interesting point. You also mentioned Hungary and LGBTQ plus rights in the global stage, but I'd like to go back to it at a later stage, because I was thinking, since you were talking about organizations, and you have been a researcher at the EUI some years ago, and you did your thesis on queer festivals. I'm reading, not to mention the name of your thesis correctly, is Queer Festivals Challenging Collective Identities in a Transnational Europe. So you used queer methodologies, I imagine, in your thesis. And I guess the time you were living and experiences the UI from a very particular perspective. If we think about inclusion, LGBTQ plus inclusion, being queer, come out at the UI. So do you have anything you want to share about your experience at the time? Also thinking about how organization include or do not include people.
Well, thanks for asking me this question. Yes, of course, I have a very personal experience with the UI. I wouldn't like to focus a lot on my personal experience. I would like to make my personal experience more understandable for everyone, and link it to what it means inclusion in an academic environment. When I arrived in 2010, I arrived with a PhD title on queer issues, on LGBTQI issues. And even the word queer back then was not very common, right? So many people would ask me what it means. So there was a real lack of knowledge on the word even. And I arrived a bit by accident at the UI because there was this specific professor I was talking before, Donatella, who was very much interested in that. But she also received lots of resistance by her colleagues in bringing in such a topic at the UI. I remind that back then, I don't know how it is today, but back then, the SPS department and the other departments, I would guess, they were very much dominated by positivist and quantitative methodologies, which makes, to some extent, which this kind of research attracts a very specific population. And usually in this population, you will not find people coming from diversity. So it's more like mainstream profiles, to be more clear with you, that get attracted by these kind of methodologies, which unavoidably has a consequence on the socio-demographics of the institution. So who, in the end of the day, arrives at the UI. And when I was there, it's true that I was feeling this heteronormativity very present, to the extent that many students who were lesbians or gay, less trans, I would say, they wouldn't come out. So there was a hesitation of coming out for multiple reasons that now, after 15 years, I can explain a bit more. But I was feeling that the main issue was that many people wouldn't like to get stigmatized as gays, lesbians, as being the lesbian of the EUI, for example, right? Because in any case, there were not so many. So if someone would come out, it would feel like I am the lesbian of the EUI. And there is this kind of also very strong idea of objectivity that was put at stake if you were a gay and lesbian person or trans person. Because, and something that comes from my personal experience, is that many colleagues of mine would actually question my capacity even of conducting objective research because I was queer and because I was working on a queer topic. And this is something that, of course, has an impact on the quality of your work, because actually you don't feel equal to equal. You don't feel that you have the same acceptance as all the others. But it also has an impact, I guess, on your self-esteem and confidence when it comes to promoting your research to the others, right? And this is something that the EUI back then wouldn't be ready to acknowledge. And that's why, at the same time, me and other colleagues, including senior researchers, such as, I would like to mention, for example, my colleague Sabrina Marchetti, who is now a professor at Venice University, would create working groups inside the EUI in order to create spaces in which we could breathe, basically, that we could say the things as they were and bring in the gender and other approaches inside. So we created first the gender and migration working group created by Sabrina, which later transformed into gender, race, and sexuality working group. So we were a bunch of researchers from all the departments, and it was quite interdisciplinary. We would invite also many postdocs and many professors to come in and talk. The idea was not to promote our gender agenda, honestly. It was actually to make other researchers understand that bringing in gender into their own research makes their research more objective. So the accusation that we had that we were subjective, it was actually, we would just return it back by saying, actually, if you don't take into consideration gender and other discriminatory factors in your own research, you lack objectivity because you don't have a holistic picture of what you're doing, right? If you're studying, for example, education, and if you don't take into account the gender dimension, of course you miss lots of important indicators. If you're working on economics and of economic inequalities without taking into consideration race or gender, I mean, of course, you lack very important things. So the argument here was that actually our perspective, the gender perspective and the general inclusion perspective brings more objectivity in the research.
That's a very clear argument to reverse the the opposing point. So are you saying that a change in the way subjects or certain areas of study are considered and including them could also be a way to deconstruct, to challenge systemic inequalities or systemic exclusion? I'm thinking particularly for universities, because I think there is an assumption that in universities should lead the way, and certain problems do not exist in universities as compared to other organizations. But from what you are saying, and also from what our experience can be, this is not a given, right? So universities are organizations as other ones, and so there may be systemic inequalities. So going back to what you were saying, so are you saying that this could be a solution, one of the solutions to eradicate, to eliminate certain barriers to inclusion?
First of all, I would like to back your argument by saying that, of course, the problem here is that many institutions, especially academic institutions, but also cultural institutions, because I'm working with cultural institutions as well, their assumption is that since we are academics, since we are artists, there is no discrimination. We are already very progressive, so everything works fine. And this is a very difficult, this makes things for DI even more difficult in this context, because it's difficult to convince people that actually, no, there are problems, because as you said, universities are also organizations. Universities are not outside of the world, they are inside of the world, and the same social dynamics that we see outside, we see them inside as well. But it's such a strong stereotype that is very much embedded within the academic population as well. Within professors, for example, I saw that it's very difficult to deconstruct. And that's why DI in academic institutions is a very specific thing to do. And for that, I think you need a specific expertise as an academic. So I'm glad that people who have PhDs now, they enter the DI sector in academic institutions, by the way. And the second is, I also support this idea that if you want, and this is something that I say to all organizations, because very often they say, yes, but we don't find enough qualified women for technical jobs, for instance, right? They would say, yeah, but we don't have many women engineers, or we don't have many disabled qualified people who apply, or whatever. Diversify the subject of the work has an impact on the diversification of the employees that would go there afterwards, right? So, and to come back to the academic institutions, make the research areas a bit more diverse, bringing in, for example, new epistemologies, new methodologies, new areas of research, not stigmatize the marginalized ones, unavoidably brings in a student body that is a bit more atypical than the one that exists until now. So for me, it it makes absolute sense, and I think it's also driven by data today, that you need to diversify your research areas, your methodologies, and your epistemologies in order to have a more diverse student body and a more diverse research body. And this is something that, unfortunately, back then, to bring my experience inside, it was it was very obvious, I would say. For example, Donatella Della Porta, who was working on social movements and who was doing qualitative research, attracted more diverse profiles. Other professors who were very much stuck to their own positivist kind of epistemologies were bringing in only a very specific um, population. And I don't want to caricature to tell you what kind of population. I think you can imagine what kind of. So yes, we need diversification of research areas in order to have a diverse body. This is one of the strategies. It's not the only one, but this can be one of the strategies. Yes.
Thank you. That's super interesting. And I was thinking another strategy that somehow you touched upon is creating spaces for conversation, and also stand up. I would add also stand up for certain values. And in this sense, I would like to broaden a little bit the scope and go in back to Pride and participating in Pride. And so as an institution, this year we will march Toscana Pride. And Toscana Pride as a specific manifesto, so it has certain objectives as a Pride March that they want to raise visibility on, or fight for, and it goes from ensuring rights for transgender people and non-binary people to ensure marriage equality in Italy and in the world, in the states where we still don't have it. It touches upon reproductive rights and a number of other issues concerning the LGBTQ plus community, and also the intersections between LGBTQ plus people and different other communities or underrepresented groups. And in that sense, I was also thinking of what you were saying before about Hungary. For those who don't know, they recently passed a law banning the right to assembly, and they particularly targeted LGBTQ plus people. In particular, and I'm quoting, they banned any events that portray divergence from self-identity corresponding to sex at birth, sex change, or homosexuality. So in Europe at the moment, we have a mixed picture. So we have states who are passing laws to equalize marriage, to ensure marriage for same-sex couples or other forms of formalized partnerships. But we also have states like Hungary, and there are, when laws banning these type of freedoms are passed in Europe or in the European Union more specifically, there is some opposition, some protests, but there are also states like Italy, who are member states of the EU, who stay silent or don't really say anything, which is very concerning. So I was wondering if you have you would like to share any thoughts on where we are in terms of LGBTQ plus rights in Europe. It's a very mixed picture.
I was recently invited at a debate of Amnesty International on this question on LGBTQI rights in Europe, and the title was "One Step Forward, Two Steps Backward." I think this is a very good title to say where we are right now. It's not a linear process. At some point, we believed 20 years ago that things would unavoidably lead to LGBTQI equality. We see today that this is not true. that first of all, there are specificities across countries at the European level. So we are not advancing, neither are the same pace, neither are the same, how say, like deepness of rights. Bringing in civil union, for example, in a context like Italy was important 10 years ago, but we see that this does not advance towards marriage equality, right? And on the other hand, something that we have to stress today is is transphobia and how it expands across Europe. We see that very much in the UK. We see that very much in the United States, and of course, countries like Poland, Hungary, other countries as well. Even in France, there were many transphobic laws that were introduced recently. So we see that there is a kind of backlash when it comes to gender identity and gender affirmation. There is lots of stigmatization on non-binary people as well. And we see that even many organizations today, they don't know how to position themselves when they have students, for instance, or employees who are trans or non-binary. They panic. They call us and they say, so what we should do? Should we call them this pronoun or not pronoun? Isn't too excessive? Whatever. So we have a kind of panic. I call it institutional anxiety, which is not necessarily something because people are bad or nasty. It shows lack of knowledge about these issues, basically. It shows how societies are not training citizens on gender identity and sexual orientation. So it goes back also to sexual education at schools. So there are so many topics. We see that about intersex people, right? So we have, I think, more or less 10 countries in Europe who forbid interventions at birth for intersex babies, but we have some others who still allow them. So the picture is, yeah, it's not homogeneous. And I think the difficulty for the EUI, for yourself, is precisely this one, like how to position yourself as a European institution in Italy, where there are many legal constraints when it comes to LGBTQI rights, and at the same time being an academic leader and bringing diverse talent, right? So I think this is quite of a challenge. And yes, I would say that the things do not advance in a linear way. That's for sure. Yes.
I would like to go back to what you were saying about transphobia, because I was listening to an interview to Sarah McBride. She's a trans congresswoman in the United States, and so she's working in Congress, and she was saying basically in the United States, with marriage equality, we kind of thought at some point that everything was solved, everything would have become better, and at the same time we had this reaction from people who felt bad in the past for not having supported marriage equality. And so as a counter reaction, when it came to trans rights at the time, they said, okay, at the time we didn't support gay rights and lesbian rights, so now we need to support trans rights. And so we had this moment, at least in the United States and maybe also in the UK, it was a short moment where trans rights were advocated, and there were a lot of improvements, and the trans community, no, the LGBTQ plus community in general, kind of went from okay, people are supporting trans rights 101, and we as a community, as a minority, we went to trans rights 301, 401, and there we lost people because we lacked the necessary awareness, and we didn't do the necessary work to bring people to that point. And so I was thinking also now with the way gender ideology and the notion of gender ideology and the fact that, and transphobia, how these concepts are weaponized in the name of protecting women, for example, when it comes to transphobia. Or gender ideology. So I was wondering if, in your opinion, this is something new that we are seeing when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights, or did it happen in the past and it's just repetition of what we already saw? Because as you said, these things are not linear, so they can be very messy. But is there a pattern, or is it something new?
Well, the pattern, I would say, like what the systemic context is that we live in patriarchal societies, and this hasn't changed at all. So there is gender inequality in general. But what gender inequality means, it does not only mean that women are unfavored vis-a-vis men, but it also means that there is this ideology. So I return the word back. There is this ideology claiming that women and men are different biologically and ontologically. That there is what we call the sex difference, that men and women are not the same, they are opposite. We still talk about the opposite sex, right, when we want to refer to women or men accordingly. So this is a false belief, right? And today we have even scientific data coming from hard sciences, and it's not just a sociologist talking now, coming from biology and medicine and endocrinology, showing that basically this binarism, this binary between men and women, is a false idea, right? It doesn't exist. We are more diverse than that. So this kind of thing, which started becoming quite present in the medical sector as well at some point, because biologists would even say that, yes, it's true that that doesn't make sense, this binarism, actually backlashed with the gender ideology. So the gender ideology movement coming from the Vatican, the US, Eastern Europe, whatever, used this by saying that you're trying to tell us that men and women are the same and that there are no biological differences and whatever and whatever. So actually there is this kind of reactionary movement that is still very strong. And we can see that in different campaigns, anti-abortion campaigns as well, anti-trans campaigns. So all these things are linked to some extent. It's not that the one is very different from the other. That's why I say that the pattern is already here. Maybe the new thing that we see the last couple of years is that within the LGBTQI movement, we thought that we were advancing all together towards more rights, but now we see that there is a kind of distance between lesbian and gay rights because of the equal marriage, and trans rights that are very much attacked. But actually, to be honest, the new transphobia is the old homophobia. So actually, it's the same political actors who utilize transphobia as they used to do with homophobia back then. So in that sense, it's not very new.
I think I like this concept of the transphobia is the new homophobia in a way. That's very, very true, I think. So I'd like to conclude with the last question before leaving space for questions from our audience. So I wanna give space for some reflections from people who are attending. But so I don't know, it's a final question that probably cannot be answered so quickly, but so how can we resist basically? And going back to Pride, since it's Pride Month and we're still participating in Pride marches, is this still a necessary form of resistance? Is it enough? Is it sufficient? Are there other ways we can challenge the patriarchy and heteronormative societies and these ideologies that are based on false premises and want to eradicate really minorities? So just an easy question to conclude.
Yes, very easy to respond. First of all, I would like to congratulate you also for participating in Toscana Pride. Back then, Toscana Pride didn't exist when I was a student, and I think it's very important that you create this kind of synergies between the local social movements of Tuscany and the student population of the UI, who is also basically foreign population, so maybe they don't speak Italian at all, they are not very aware of what's going on in the local context. So it's important to bring these bridges and make the UI part of local society as well, and not just something that is on the hill by itself and has nothing to do there. So of course it's important to participate in the Pride. Of course it's important to participate even if you're not LGBTQI, because what is important is basically to bring in this, like to be visible, to bring in support, to show support concretely. It's also a place where people have fun. So it's not just, of course, it's political, but it's also a place where you can breathe, as I said before, for the gender working groups. I mean, you breathe, you talk, you feel free. I think one of the advice that I mean, I don't like giving advice because I don't have any advice to give, but what I see from my experience is that it's very important not to forget people and groups. And in my experience, as you said before, like we see that when we advance for equal marriage, we forgot trans rights. When we advance for LGBTQI rights, we forget people with disabilities. When we do the one, we forget what's going on in Palestine, for instance. So for me, it's important to have all these social kind of sensitivity and say that actually, okay, minorities are attacked, and there is a kind of common ground in these attacks, and we need to be able to create bridges and to create synergies. Also because LGBTQI people are not just LGBTQI. So this is something that I have always tried to advocate, and because we tend to forget that actually a lesbian person can also be a disabled person, can be a black person, can be different. I mean, so intersectionality here is not just a word that we use in order to like pass the time, right? For me, it has very concrete implications, and it applies also on the way we do DI today, because DI is also something that we have learned to do on a more compartmentalized way. So today we will discuss disability, tomorrow we will discuss gender equality, the other day we'll discuss whatever, race and racism. But actually sometimes we forget that all these things are like connected the one with the other, and we need to find new tools and new methodologies and sensitivities in order to bring them together. I don't have the ready-made solution, of course, but I'm working for that, and I think this is one advice I can give to DI professionals in general, but also to students and to all people interested in these topics.
Thank you, Konstantinos. I think this is a good place to stop our conversation and open the floor if anyone has some curiosity, questions, comments to add. I see some hands raised. I don't know who, if Alessio or Miriam were first, but
You can go ahead, Alessio, if you want.
I was about to say the same, but so thank you, Miriam. So I will break the ice. So first of all, I would like to thank Konstantinos for his presentation and his chat with us. You gave us a lot of food for thoughts to reflect. Just a short introduction. I'm a member of the staff of the EUI, and together with Giuseppe and other colleagues, we are actually the promoter of the LGBTQI plus staff network, the proud to be at the EUI. So we very much appreciate having you here to mark the Proud Month. And we hope that you can join the UI delegation to the Toscana Pride this Saturday, if you have the chance. Virtually at least. I would like to go back to the first to the first ideas that you share with us, the first knowledge. It was very interesting to actually go to how fast the process of the whole EDI culture developed. You said 10 years ago, you were still at the EY, and we still could not believe EDI area could develop as a professional area, and now you're actually working with your own company. That's great. It was interesting to see how this area developed along a legal path, so from a legal framework, they complying with legislation and so on and so forth, until it stops last year in 2024 with this new anti-woke trend that is taking ground. Speaking about this, you said a workaround in order not to lose ground could be, for instance, changing terminology. So, for instance, using well-being instead of DI. And then I would like to have your thoughts about terminology, because at the moment we still have many terminology. So you spoke about DI. We at the EY have the EDI terms, but then we have the DEI terms, which is most commonly used. And then Giuseppe also mentioned the equal opportunities. I mean, it is quite impressive that in less than 10 years, we're a full new area developed. We still haven't identified a common term to identify the area. And that could actually be very dangerous to create a culture. So my question to you is, in order to create awareness and more generally a culture, we need to speak the same language and therefore to agree on same terminology. So what would be, according to you, the best strategy to go through in order to survive the challenging times we are living, and to consolidate EDI or whatsoever culture? And second follow-up question, can the pride have a stronger role in this fighting against the anti-woke culture?
Thank you so much, Alessio, for that. So just to make clear for your first part of the question, when I said that the well-being is a strategy that was proposed by the client, I didn't adopt immediately. I didn't say, okay, let's move on to well-being. I think we should stick to our values, but we should also be diplomatic enough. Why I say that? Because it's important when you do EDI, especially in specific contexts or in specific professional sectors where you see that there is some willingness to engage with that, but they don't have necessarily the culture to do that. You should also do it progressively and not confrontationally, because the confrontation path, which is more what I usually call the political path, usually brings backlash in the organization, and very soon. So it doesn't make sense in the end of the day. So if it's to lose momentum at once, I think it does not make so much sense. So for me, the important is to be as adaptive as possible, depending on the context. You mentioned, for example, are we talking about DI, EDI, etc.? And I agree that theoretically we should stick to one terminology, but I remind you also that the LGBTQI acronym is not something that very consensual. Are we talking about lesbian and gay? Are we talking about LGBT, binary, asexual, the umbrella? I mean, even 40 years after, we are not sure what is the right acronym to use, right? And so I don't have, again, a ready-made solution. What I usually do is try to be as inclusive as possible in my own wording. So I use words that are the most inclusive and the most objective as possible. And of course, I'm open to learning new things, right? This is part of our diversity and inclusion policies, like that. Don't feel that you know everything. We have lots of new things to learn. Society progresses, society advances, and especially when it comes to LGBTQI issues and gender and sexuality, things are moving very fast. And we need to be as adaptable as possible in order to accommodate all this diversity, right? Into a learning process, which can be individual but also institutional. So institutions also should put in place mechanisms that make this conversation open. And when it comes to your second about pride, yes, totally, I agree that pride, I mean, we should participate in the pride, and we should also be, we should mobilize internally in the pride as members of the LGBTI community to say, to bring in this idea that actually what we are doing is not woke, is another accusation that is now used by not only by the far right, and here I would like to make a point, also by other actors of the political spectrum, unfortunately, who would, everyone that talks about inequalities, injustice, or discrimination in a very broad sense, nowadays they are being accused of woke. And this is something, yeah, quite fast actually, and now we see that this has very, very concrete consequences on academic research as well, because many researchers nowadays are self-censoring themselves. They do not apply for projects, they do not even use the words gender, intersectionality, racism, LGBTQI, because they are afraid that they will not receive the necessary fundings. So it's a backlash that it's not only in terms of vocabulary, but it has real, material, concrete implications. And of course, as I said before, not mentioning gender in your own research makes your research less objective. So this has also consequences on the quality of scientific research that we are conducting nowadays.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Miriam, would you like to ask a question?
So first of all, thank you a lot, Konstantinos, for this conversation, which I found really interesting. And mine is more of a comment rather than a question. So I really found interesting what you said about the subjectivity and objectivity of research in academia. And I wanted to bring something from my personal experience. I spent a part of my academic career in Hungary, and I found that there the situation, the environment was very hostile and discouraging with respect to the LGBTQ plus community. So I could see that also people from other countries did not want to apply for programs to go there, to study there, and to do research there. So I think that it's a matter of topics, of course, meaning that there's they lack objectivity not only in topics, because they don't consider the queer aspect of research, but also in terms of expertise, meaning that discouraging people from coming and doing research in their country. I think that there's some kind of limitation also with respect to the people, the experts that are coming to Hungarian academia to conduct, of course, research in general. So I find this also very interesting because it has some impact also on academia in general, national academia in the country. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was a really good point, Miriam. And you made the Hungarian example. I just like to add, I'm also thinking sometimes at the economic factor, right? So we are talking about inequalities, and sometimes even in countries where education is more accessible, but if you don't allow people to have the necessary resources to do their research, that's also very, very problematic. So talking again about the different levels of inequalities and the different situations in different countries. I think we have time for another very quick question because I see that the time is running out. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in or for comments or final reflection?
If no one wants to like ask something, I will go ahead. It's more like more of a personal curiosity. But I wanted to ask Konstantinos, how was the let's say transition from like PhD researching like the topic that you like or that you find interesting to like consultancy and in general trying to help organization and even private companies, private sector to try and be more diverse, more inclusive, because it's also like very close to my kind of personal experience because I did some like research, like the majority of my research in university was related to EDI topics, to minorities, let's say, like for example, refugees, like recognition of refugee status related to LGBTQI plus and gender identity, like sexual orientation and gender identity. And then I started working in a more like in human resources kind of. So I was like wondering how was for you like the change, the transition? Like first question. Then I have a follow-up.
Very good question. Difficult and necessary, I would say, at the same time. It's true when you move from the academic sector to the private sector, because I started working as a DI employee in a company. Everything changes. You're not familiar with what it means to work for the profit sector. You're not familiar with the very specific operational things that you put in place. For example, me, I was training a lot back then, companies and the public sector on anti-discrimination frameworks. I learned a lot. I had the specific expertise, but at the same time, I learned a lot. And I was also very excited that I was training people who were not familiar with these topics. So this is a very nice challenge, right? Because you bring in your passion to context in which they have absolutely no idea, and you have to find ways pedagogically and intellectually to convince them that what you say is correct. So this was quite exciting. And then there is the material aspect, because I didn't find a permanent job at academia. So for me, it was also a matter of life and death to some extent. I don't come from a rich family. Nobody could support me. So I needed to work. And fortunately, my skills and qualifications were quite quickly transferable for these kind of jobs. And I remember when I was offered a permanent contract in the first company I worked, it was quite crazy for me, because I was like, okay, I have been working in the academia so many years with so precarious contracts, very low salaries. No one offered me any real contract. And now I find myself after 1 week of interviews, that this company offers me a permanent contract and money. I mean, what's going on here? So I found some also inequality in that sense, because I'm like, okay, why aren't these resources part of the university as well? Why it's only the private sector that can bring in these resources? And this I found it's a pity, to be honest, right? But this is how things are. So that's why I say necessary, because I mean, we have a life, we need to survive, we need to live, but at the same time, we need to do a job that really talks to us. Because it's still a very stimulating job. It's a very, very interesting job. And that's why I see, as I said before, so many young people writing me saying, I want to work in this sector. How can I do? What is the strategy? Unfortunately, I say now that this is not the good moment. Maybe we should wait a bit to see how it evolves. But I'm also happy to see that there is lots of enthusiasm for these jobs.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. I see myself a bit in what you said.
Thank you.
So thank you, Konstantinos. That was a very, very interesting conversation. And as Alessio was saying, is giving us a lot of food for thought. And also you gave us the fuel to march at Toscana Pride on Saturday. I hope I will see you all there together with the staff network, the societies, and all the UI community. I also would like to thank Andrea, Valentina, and Anna, who are always great in preparing the episodes for the podcast and also in the post-production phase, which I don't know anything about. So they're super in putting these episodes together. And as Andrea always remind me, I need to tell you that you can find this episode in our platforms, and I think definitely on YouTube and on Radio Cavolo. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for all of you who participated and for your questions. And I'll see you around, and hopefully on Saturday at Toscana Pride. And Konstantinos, I hope to see you soon in Italy or maybe in Paris, and to
With
collaborate
pleasure.
again.
Yes. Thank you all so much for this episode. I really enjoyed it. And happy Pride, happy Toscana Pride.
Thank you, and happy Pride
Thank you.
Month to you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.
Bye, thanks.